Picture this, a sprawling empire, rich with gold and glory, its chariots thundering across the ancient Near East, its kings trading letters and daughters with pharaohs. For centuries, the kingdom of Mitanni stood as a titan among giants, a sophisticated civilization whose influence stretched from the Mediterranean to the Zagros Mountains. Its warriors were legendary, its diplomats cunning, its culture vibrant and complex, and then almost without warning, it was gone, not just defeated, not merely conquered, but utterly erased from the map, its cities abandoned, its people scattered, its very memory fading into myth. Today, Mitanni survives only in fragments, a handful of clay tablets, a few enigmatic ruins, the ghost of a name in ancient texts. How does an entire civilization simply vanish? What forces could topple a kingdom that once rivaled Egypt and Babylon, leaving behind little more than whispers and dust? This is one of history's most captivating mysteries, a puzzle that has baffled scholars for generations. In this video, we will journey deep into the heart of that mystery, pulling together clues from archaeology, climate science, and deciphered texts to reconstruct the dramatic rise and astonishing fall of Mitanni. We will meet its elite chariot warriors, navigate its intricate web of alliances and betrayals, and walk the halls of its lost capital, a city that remains hidden to this day. Along the way, we will uncover timeless lessons about power, resilience, and the fragile threads that hold even the mightiest societies together. This is not just a story about the past, it is a reflection on the forces that shape our world still. So settle in, open your mind, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. The mystery of Mitanni awaits. Around 1500 BCE, a remarkable transformation began in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This was not the birth of a typical ancient kingdom. The Mitanni did not simply rise from a single tribe or conqueror. Instead, they coalesced from a fascinating fusion of peoples. The region was already home to the Hurrians, an ancient group with deep roots in the area. But into this mix came a new element, an Indo-European elite, likely warriors and rulers who spoke a language related to ancient Sanskrit. This powerful combination created a unique social and political structure. The Hurrian majority provided the agricultural base and many cultural traditions, while the Indo-European minority contributed a formidable military aristocracy and a pantheon of gods that included names like Mitra and Varuna, deities familiar from the Vedas of India. This blending of cultures became the bedrock of Mitanni's identity, setting them apart from their purely Semitic or Mesopotamian neighbors. Their very origin story is a testament to the interconnectedness of the ancient world, where vast distances were no barrier to the movement of people and ideas. This cultural fusion found its ultimate expression in a revolutionary military technology, the light war chariot. The Mitanni didn't just use chariots, they perfected them. Their mastery of horse breeding and training was unparalleled, turning the chariot into a swift, mobile platform for archers that could dominate the battlefields of the Bronze Age. This expertise is immortalized in a remarkable text written by a Mitanni horse trainer named Kikulai. Discovered in the Hittite capital, this manual details a complex 7-month training regimen for chariot horses, involving intricate conditioning, diet, and exercise plans. It reveals a scientific approach to animal husbandry that was centuries ahead of its time. This technological edge provided the Mitanni with an overwhelming advantage. A charge of these lightweight, horse-drawn vehicles, each carrying a driver and a warrior armed with a composite bow, could break infantry lines and unleash a hail of arrows with devastating speed. It was the blitzkrieg of its era, and it allowed the Mitanni to project power across the fertile plains of the northern Near East, securing their borders and subjugating smaller city-states. With this military supremacy, the Mitanni kingdom rapidly expanded its influence, forging a vast sphere of control that historians often call an empire. Their territory, known as Hanagalbat, stretched from the Mediterranean coast in the west across northern Syria and deep into what is now northern Iraq. At the heart of this realm were their great capital cities, though their exact locations remain one of history's enticing puzzles. Washukani, the primary royal seat, and Tate, another major center, were renowned as hubs of diplomacy, trade, and power. Though their ruins are likely buried beneath tells in modern-day Syria or Turkey, contemporary accounts describe them as impressive and wealthy. From these nerve centers, the Mitanni kings, who bore the title Great King, managed a network of vassal states and engaged in high-stakes diplomacy with other superpowers, most notably Egypt. This territorial control wasn't just about conquest. It was about dominating the vital trade routes that connected Mesopotamia to Anatolia and the Mediterranean, funneling wealth and luxury goods into the Mitanni heartland and financing their burgeoning state. Guarding this wealth and wielding its military might was a privileged social class known as the Maryannu. This term, found in texts from across the region, referred to the elite chariot warrior nobility of Mitanni society. They were more than just soldiers. They were an aristocratic caste, a knighthood of the ancient world. Their status was granted in exchange for military service, and they were rewarded with land and titles, creating a powerful class of loyal nobles bound directly to the king. The Maryannu were the epitome of Mitanni's martial values, embodying the skill, courage, and prestige that came with mastering the chariot. Their existence highlights a society organized for war and expansion, where military prowess was the primary path to power and honor. This formidable institution was the iron fist inside Mitanni's velvet glove of diplomacy, the force that secured its borders and enforced the will of its kings, making the kingdom a respected and feared power for nearly 2 centuries. To understand Mitanni's place in the world, you have to picture the board. To the southwest lay Egypt, a fabulously wealthy empire under the warrior pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, flush with Nubian gold and eager to expand its influence north into Canaan and beyond. To the northwest, in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, was the rising power of the Hittites, a fiercely disciplined kingdom with its own imperial ambitions. And to the southeast, though temporarily subdued, was the ancient heartland of Assyria, a sleeping giant that would not remain quiet forever. Right in the middle of this swirling vortex of ambition and power sat Mitanni. Its territory was the crucial buffer zone, the strategic prize all its neighbors coveted. This wasn't a comfortable position. It was an existential challenge that demanded a new kind of statecraft. The Mitanni kings couldn't rely on chariots alone to survive. They had to become masters of the diplomatic game, and their primary tool was the art of the alliance, sealed not just with promises but with people. The most famous of these alliances was with Egypt, and it was brokered through one of history's most significant royal marriages. After years of sporadic conflict and border skirmishes with Pharaoh Thutmose IV, the Mitanni king, Artatama, saw an opportunity for a lasting peace. He offered his daughter's hand in marriage to the Egyptian ruler. This was far more than a romantic gesture. It was a high-stakes political transaction. The princess who traveled to Egypt became a living symbol of the treaty, a guarantee of her father's good behavior, and a crucial conduit for communication between the two courts. This marriage set a powerful precedent, Subsequent pharaohs, including the renowned Amenhotep III, would also take Mitanni princesses as wives, creating a multi-generational bond. The Amarna letters, a priceless cache of diplomatic correspondence, reveal the intimate and sometimes fraught nature of this relationship. In one letter, the Mitanni king Tushratta writes to Amenhotep III, chiding him for sending gold-plated statues instead of solid gold ones as a wedding gift for his daughter, revealing the intricate dance of gift-giving and perceived respect that underpinned these alliances. Yet, this friendship with Egypt was always a calculated risk. While it provided a powerful southern shield, it inevitably provoked the Hittites to the north, who viewed a strong Egypt-Mitanni bloc as a direct threat to their own expansion. The Mitanni rulers were therefore constantly engaged in a perilous balancing act, using their alliance with one power to check the ambitions of another. A Hittite threat might mean sending extra gifts and assurances to Egypt. Egyptian weakness or distraction might necessitate cautious overtures to the Hittite king to avoid provoking an attack. This required an incredible network of spies, diplomats, and messengers who constantly traversed the ancient world, carrying tablets of cuneiform script that could mean the difference between peace and war. The Mitanni court must have been a whirlwind of intrigue, with ambassadors from rival empires jostling for influence, each trying to decipher the true intentions of the king. One poorly chosen word, one delayed tribute payment, or one misinterpreted military movement could shatter the delicate equilibrium they worked so hard to maintain. Their entire foreign policy was a high-wire act performed without a net, where the price of a misstep was not merely a diplomatic embarrassment, but the potential annihilation of their kingdom. This relentless pressure to be smarter and more agile than their larger neighbors was the defining reality of Mitanni's golden age. But the true measure of a civilization extends far beyond its battlefields and royal courts, and Mitanni's legacy is woven just as deeply into the fabric of art, technology, and spiritual life. While their chariots secured their borders, it was their cultural innovations that defined their identity and spread their influence peacefully across the ancient world. One of their most remarkable and tangible contributions was in the art of glassmaking. Archaeological excavations, particularly at sites like Nuzi, have uncovered stunning examples of Mitanni glasswork, vibrantly colored beads, vessels, and inlays in deep blues, whites, and yellows. These weren't merely decorative, they were technological marvels. Mitanni artisans pioneered a technique for crafting core-formed glass vessels, a complex process involving the shaping of molten glass around a clay core. This expertise made their glass a highly prized luxury good, traded extensively with Egypt and Mesopotamia, and their stylistic motifs, such as intricate floral patterns, were eagerly adopted by other cultures, leaving a subtle but enduring mark on the aesthetic of the Bronze Age. This artistic flourish was matched by a profound spiritual depth, centered on a rich and complex pantheon of gods that perfectly mirrored the kingdom's blended origins. At the head of this divine assembly stood Teshub, the powerful storm god, often depicted standing upon a bull and wielding a triple thunderbolt. His consort was the sun goddess Hepat, a figure of majesty and maternal power. This pairing of a storm god with a sun goddess was a distinctly Hurrian theological concept that the Mitanni elevated to the state religion. Yet, fascinatingly, the names of other deities found in Mitanni treaties like Mitra, Varuna, and Indra are straight from the Vedas, the ancient sacred texts of India. This provides incredible linguistic evidence of their Indo-European roots. Their religion wasn't a rigid dogma but a living, breathing system that influenced daily life, from grand state ceremonies that legitimized the king's rule to local oracle consultations and seasonal festivals that united the community. This spiritual synthesis offered a divine blueprint for their worldly existence, a harmony of powerful force and nurturing order, of indigenous tradition and ND Chinese letter INFLUENCE. Of course, no discussion of Mitanni innovation is complete without returning to the source of their power, the horse. Their most famous and practical technological gift to the world was their revolutionary approach to equestrian care, meticulously detailed in the Kikuli text. This document is so much more than a simple manual. It's a window into a highly sophisticated, almost scientific, animal husbandry program. Kikuli, a Mitanni horse trainer working for the Hittites, outlines a rigorous 184-day training regimen for chariot horses. The text prescribes everything in astonishing detail: specific diets of barley and hay, precise amounts of exercise and rest, and even the exact number of laps a horse should run during each training session. It introduces concepts like interval training and thermoregulation, advising trainers to cool down hot horses by leading them through a river. This systematic approach transformed horse training from a matter of brute force into a disciplined science, dramatically increasing the endurance and effectiveness of chariot teams. The fact that this text was preserved and copied by their Hittite rivals is the ultimate testament to its value. It was a military secret so potent that even their enemies had to adopt it. The everyday life of Mitanni citizens was also enriched by skilled craftsmanship, as seen in the beautiful artifacts that have survived the millennia. Their ceramicists produced a distinctive style of pottery known as Nuzi ware, characterized by its thin, finely made walls and elegant painted designs in white on a dark slip background. These were not crude utilitarian objects but refined tableware, indicating a society that valued domestic beauty and ritual feasting. Furthermore, thousands of intricate cylinder seals have been discovered, carved with elaborate scenes featuring their gods, mythical creatures, and heroic figures. These seals were used to mark ownership and authenticate documents, but they also served as a portable art form, spreading Mitanni iconography wherever trade and administration reached. Each rolled impression was a tiny story, a stamp of identity that proclaimed the owner's connection to the culture and power of the Mitanni kingdom. Together, these cultural and technological achievements paint a picture of a civilization operating at its zenith, a sophisticated society whose creative and intellectual energy was every bit as formidable as its military might. But to truly grasp the power of the Maryannu, we must move beyond the battlefield and into the very structure of Mitanni society. For these warriors were far more than just elite soldiers. They were the bedrock of the kingdom's political and economic order. Their status was hereditary, passed down through generations, creating a closed aristocratic caste that stood between the king and the common people. In exchange for their unwavering military service, a Maryannu warrior was granted a plot of land known as an ilku by the crown. This was not merely a payment, it was the very engine of the Mitanni feudal system. The land grant came with an obligation. The warrior was required to provide himself, his chariot, his horses, and his driver whenever the king called. This system ensured the state could rapidly mobilize a highly trained, professional fighting force without maintaining a standing army, a brilliant and cost-effective solution for Bronze Age logistics. The land itself was worked by tenant farmers or slaves, freeing the Maryannu to dedicate their lives to the constant training and preparation that their role demanded. This created a self-sustaining cycle. Military power secured the land funded the military power, and the entire structure solidified the social hierarchy, placing the chariot warrior at the pinnacle of prestige and influence. Their equipment was a marvel of ancient engineering, a symphony of specialized craftsmanship that gave them a terrifying advantage. The composite bow was their weapon of choice, a technological leap far superior to the simple wooden bows used by common infantry. Crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew laminated together, this bow was smaller but immensely more powerful, capable of firing an arrow with enough force to penetrate the leather armor of the era at a considerable distance. From the platform of a moving chariot, this made the Maryannu archer a swift and deadly artillery unit. The chariots themselves were lightweight masterpieces of design, constructed from bent wood and leather for flexibility and speed, often carrying just 2 men, a driver to control the team of horses and the warrior himself, who stood ready to unleash a volley of arrows. This combination of mobility and firepower was revolutionary. On the open plains that characterized much of their territory, a squadron of these chariots could outflank, harass, and decimate slower-moving infantry formations with near impunity. They could swiftly change the tide of a battle, targeting enemy commanders and shattering morale long before the main forces ever clashed. The life of a Maryannu was one of relentless discipline. Their training began in boyhood, focusing not just on archery and charioteering, but on the intricate art of managing the war horses that were as crucial to their success as any weapon. They had to learn to shoot accurately from a wildly bouncing platform, to control a team of animals amidst the chaos of battle, and to execute complex maneuvers in perfect coordination with their comrades. This required a profound bond between the warrior, his driver, and his horses, a unity forged through years of practice. The Kikuli text, with its obsessive focus on diet, exercise, and care, reveals that the Mitanni understood that the performance of the machine, the chariot, was entirely dependent on the biological performance of the horses. A Maryannu was therefore as much a master horseman as he was a warrior. This intense, lifelong preparation created a professional military class of unparalleled skill and confidence, a force that believed utterly in its own superiority. When they thundered onto the field, they weren't just soldiers, they were the embodiment of Mitanni's power, a sight designed to instill awe and fear. For nearly 2 centuries, this system was virtually unbeatable, creating a stable, expansionist kingdom held together by the loyalty and might of its warrior elite. Yet, this very strength contained the seeds of a profound vulnerability, for the fate of the entire realm had become inextricably tied to the continued dominance of the chariot on the battlefield and the unwavering loyalty of the noble class that rode them. Yet for all its brilliance, this diplomatic balancing act was inherently unstable, built upon a foundation of shifting sands. The alliance with Egypt, while a monumental achievement, came with its own set of risks and limitations. The pharaohs were notoriously fickle partners, their foreign policy often changing with the ascension of a new ruler or the shifting priorities of their court. A letter from the Mitanni king Tushratta to the young pharaoh Akhenaten reveals the deep anxiety this could cause. Tushratta desperately pleads for the gold statues promised by Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III, not merely for their material value, but as a very public symbol that the alliance remained strong. To the watching Hittites and Assyrians, a delay or reduction in such gifts was not a minor diplomatic snub. It was a glaring signal that the bond between the two powers was weakening, an invitation to test Mitanni's resolve. The Amarna letters expose a relationship constantly navigating a narrow path between respectful friendship and barely veiled suspicion, where every shipment of gold, every exchange of luxury goods, was a carefully calibrated measure of trust and power. This precarious reliance on Egypt became Mitanni's greatest vulnerability when a new and far more aggressive power emerged in Anatolia. The Hittite king Superiority I was a strategic genius and a ruthless expansionist, and he viewed the Mitanni-Egyptian bloc as the primary obstacle to his own imperial ambitions. He understood that to break Mitanni, he first had to shatter its confidence and isolate it from its powerful ally. So Ptolemaeus' strategy was masterful in its cunning. He did not initially launch a full-scale invasion. Instead, he began a relentless campaign of psychological and political warfare, exploiting the smallest cracks in Mitanni's armor. He actively supported rival claimants to the Mitanni throne, fueling internal dissent and dynastic squabbles that weakened the kingdom from within. He then skillfully provoked a series of border conflicts with Mitanni's vassal states in Syria, drawing Mitanni's military resources away from its heartland and forcing it into a protracted war of attrition on its periphery. Each of these calculated moves was designed to demonstrate Egypt's inability or unwillingness to come to its allies' aid, slowly eroding the very foundation of the treaty that had guaranteed Mitanni's security for generations. The final, masterful blow in Ptolemaeus' campaign was perhaps the most devastating. After years of weakening Mitanni through proxy wars and internal subversion, he launched a surprise invasion directly into the kingdom's core territory. His armies moved with stunning speed, bypassing fortified cities and striking deep into the heartland. The ultimate prize, the Mitanni capital of Washukani, was captured and sacked, a humiliating blow that shattered the myth of the kingdom's invincibility. But Ptolemaeus' ambition extended beyond mere plunder. In a breathtaking act of diplomatic piracy, he captured Mitanni prisoners of war and skillfully inserted them as sympathetic agents into the Egyptian court. Their mission was to whisper poison into the ears of the pharaoh, to spread disinformation that portrayed Mitanni as a lost cause, a weak and unreliable ally no longer worthy of Egypt's gold or military support. This insidious propaganda campaign proved wildly effective. The Egyptian court, already distracted by Akhenaten's radical religious reforms and internal affairs, gradually disengaged, leaving Mitanni to face the Hittite onslaught alone. The mighty alliance, painstakingly built over decades through royal marriages and mountains of gold, was dismantled not on the battlefield, but through a ruthless war of perception and deceit. As if the Hittite threat from the north was not enough, Mitanni faced a simultaneous resurrection of power in the east. The ancient kingdom of Assyria, long a subdued vassal forced to pay tribute to the Mitanni kings, began to stir. Under a series of ambitious rulers, most notably Ashur-uballit I, Assyria started to assert its independence. They watched the escalating conflict between Mitanni and the Hittites with keen interest, recognizing a golden opportunity to throw off the yoke of their former masters. Ashur-uballit began a careful but determined campaign of his own, sending bold letters to the Egyptian pharaoh, addressing him as an equal brother king, a title once reserved only for great powers like Mitanni and the Hittites. This was a direct and intentional challenge to Mitanni's authority, an audacious claim to a seat at the table of empires. When the Hittites delivered their crushing blow, the Assyrians did not hesitate. They swept into the eastern provinces of the weakened Mitanni kingdom, seizing territories and resources with ruthless efficiency. Mitanni was now caught in a vicious pincer movement, its body being torn apart by two rising predators. The very diplomatic agility that had once been its greatest strength was now its curse, as it had no strong allies left to call upon and found itself completely isolated, surrounded by enemies who were once rivals, vassals, or distant powers kept carefully in check. Imagine the ancient world as a vast, interconnected web of trade, and right at its vibrant center sat the kingdom of Mitanni. Its incredible wealth and power were not simply the result of conquest. They were built on a brilliant economic foundation that turned its territory into the premier marketplace of the Bronze Age. The lifeblood of this economy was its strategic control over some of the most critical trade routes on the planet. One major artery was the road leading west from the Tigris River, through Mitanni's heartland and onward to the Mediterranean port of Ugarit, where goods could be loaded onto ships bound for Egypt and the Aegean. Another vital path ran north into Anatolia, the source of precious metals, and southeast into the core of Mesopotamia itself. By commanding these crossroads, the Mitanni kings essentially functioned as the gatekeepers of international commerce, able to tax caravans, guarantee safe passage for a fee, and ensure that their cities became bustling hubs where merchants from across the known world would congregate. The goods flowing along these routes were the luxuries and necessities that fueled ancient empires. From the east came tin, an absolutely essential component for making bronze, along with luxurious Babylonian textiles and finely crafted lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan. From the west came copper from Cyprus, coveted Aegean pottery, and the magnificent cedar wood from the forests of the Levant, prized for building temples and palaces. From the north, the Hittites supplied silver and other metals. Mitanni itself was not just a passive conduit, it was a major producer. The fertile plains of the Haber River Valley, often called the breadbasket of the north, yielded immense surpluses of barley and wheat. This agricultural wealth did more than just feed the population. It was a strategic asset. A well-fed populace was a stable one, and surplus grain could be stored for sieges, traded for other goods, or used to supply the army on its campaigns, freeing the state from total reliance on foreign food sources. This agricultural surplus also supported a thriving class of specialized artisans, whose workshops produced goods that became synonymous with Mitanni quality and style. We've already mentioned their exquisite glasswork, but their metalworkers were equally renowned, forging the fine weapons and armor that equipped the Maryannu. Textile workshops produced beautifully dyed woolens, while potters crafted the distinctive and elegant Nuzi ware. These were not just local products, they were luxury items exported across the region, adding another lucrative stream of income to the royal coffers. The production was often organized into guild-like systems, with knowledge passed down through families, ensuring a high standard of craftsmanship that became a point of national pride and economic strength. Furthermore, the economy was continuously fueled by the spoils of war and the tributes from vassal states. Every successful military campaign brought an influx of plunder: gold, silver, bronze, livestock, and human captives who could be put to work on royal projects or agricultural estates. The smaller kingdoms and city-states under Mitanni's protection were required to pay annual tribute, a form of taxation that provided a predictable, recurring income. This wealth was used to monumental effect. It funded the construction of impressive palaces and fortified cities that projected an image of unassailable power. It paid for the lavish gifts of gold statues and jewelry sent to Egyptian pharaohs to cement alliances. Most importantly, it financed the incredibly expensive military machine, the breeding and maintenance of chariot horses, the crafting of composite bows, and the provisioning of the army that protected the entire system. Yet, for all its sophistication, this economic model contained a critical and ultimately fatal vulnerability. Its immense prosperity was heavily dependent on external factors beyond its direct control. The entire system relied on a stable and peaceful international order where trade caravans could move freely and alliances held firm. When that stability began to crumble under Hittite pressure, the economy was hit with a series of devastating shocks. Invasions disrupted agricultural production in the countryside, cutting off the food supply. Attacks on vassal states dried up the flow of tribute. Most catastrophically, the Hittite campaigns severed those vital trade routes. A caravan route controlled by an enemy is no longer a source of wealth. It becomes a highway for invasion. The luxury goods stopped flowing, the royal income plummeted, and the means to maintain the elite Maryannu warriors and fund a defense evaporated. The very source of Mitanni's greatness, its central, connected location, became its greatest liability when the power of its chariots could no longer keep the peace, revealing an economy that was robust in times of plenty but frighteningly fragile in the face of sustained conflict. To truly understand the soul of Mitanni, we must step inside its temples and listen to the whispers of its gods, for religion was the invisible architecture that held this entire civilization together. At the very summit of their divine hierarchy stood the formidable couple, Teshub and Hepat. Teshub was the storm god, a figure of immense and untamable power. He was not a distant, philosophical deity but a visceral, present force in the lives of the people. He was depicted standing proudly upon a bull, his sacred animal, often brandishing a triple-pronged thunderbolt or a mighty axe. His voice was the crash of thunder that shook the very foundations of their mud-brick cities. His anger was the deluge that could wipe out a season's crops, and his favor was the life-giving rain that ensured their survival. This made worship of Teshub a matter of profound practical necessity, a constant effort to appease a god whose moods directly dictated the fate of the kingdom. Alongside him ruled his consort Hepat, the sun goddess. If Teshub represented the unpredictable, explosive power of nature, Hepat embodied its nurturing, sustaining, and orderly aspects. She was a maternal figure, a protector of royalty, and a guarantor of justice and legitimacy. This pairing was a masterstroke of theological synthesis, creating a balanced divine kingship in the heavens that mirrored the earthly rule of the Mitanni monarchs. The king himself was seen as Teshub's earthly representative, his right to rule divinely sanctioned. Major state ceremonies and victories were dedicated to this powerful duo, intertwining the fate of the dynasty with the favor of the gods. A successful reign was proof of divine blessing. A military defeat or natural disaster could be interpreted as divine displeasure, potentially destabilizing the entire political order. In this way, the state religion was a powerful tool of control, a celestial narrative that justified the social structure and demanded loyalty from all levels of society. Yet the spiritual landscape of Mitanni was far more complex and reveals its fascinating dual origins. In treaties and royal inscriptions, we find the names of other gods invoked as divine witnesses: Mitra, Varuna, and the Nasatya twins. To anyone familiar with ancient Indian religions, these names are astonishing. They are direct linguistic cousins to the Vedic gods Mitra, Varuna, and the Ashvins. This is our clearest evidence of the Indo-European heritage of the Mitanni ruling class. They brought their own gods with them, folding them into the existing Hurrian pantheon. It created a layered spiritual world. The Hurrian population continued to worship their familiar local deities and participate in village festivals, while the aristocracy might have held private rituals for these more exclusive ancestral gods. This religious flexibility was likely a key to their successful rule, allowing for a form of cultural integration without forced assimilation. For the average person, religion was experienced not in grand state ceremonies but through local festivals, household shrines, and the crucial practice of seeking oracles. Seasonal festivals marking the planting and harvest, likely dedicated to a fertility goddess like Shoshka, the Hurrian equivalent of Ishtar, would have been major communal events. These were times of feasting, processions, and rituals that reinforced social bonds and provided a rhythmic structure to the year. More personally, individuals facing difficult decisions, a merchant about to embark on a risky trade journey, a farmer concerned about his fields, or even a noble unsure of a political alliance would have consulted an oracle. This could involve divination through examining animal entrails, interpreting dreams, or observing the flight patterns of birds. The answers provided by these priestly intermediaries offered guidance and a sense of control in an unpredictable world, connecting everyday anxieties to the will of the gods. Unfortunately, much of their rich mythological narrative tradition is lost to us, surviving only in fragments and references found in the texts of their Hittite neighbors, who eagerly adopted and adapted Hurrian myths. The most famous of these is the Song of Kumarbi, a cycle of stories that bears striking similarities to later Greek cosmogony. It tells of a succession of gods. First, Alalu is king, who is overthrown by Anu, who is in turn overthrown by Kumarbi, who bites off Anu's genitals. Kumarbi then gives birth to Teshub, who eventually must battle for supremacy against his father and a stone monster created to defeat him. These are not simple children's stories. They are profound, often violent, narratives that explore fundamental questions of power, succession, conflict between generations, and the nature of cosmic order. The fact that the Mitanni would have been familiar with these myths suggests a spiritual life that was deeply philosophical, attempting to make sense of the chaos of existence through powerful allegory. Their religion was thus a complete system. It justified the king's power, organized society, offered comfort to the individual, and provided a grand, cosmic story for the civilization itself, a story of powerful forces clashing and finding a balance, much like the kingdom of Mitanni did on Earth. For decades, the only evidence of the Mitanni kingdom came from the boasts of its enemies and the flattery of its allies in foreign texts. It was archaeology that finally gave this ghost of a civilization a physical form, pulling it from the realm of myth into history. The work began in earnest in the early 20th century as teams of excavators, drawn by mentions in the Amarna letters, began to scour the landscapes of modern-day Syria and Iraq. They weren't just looking for a lost city, they were searching for an entire lost world. What they found at places like Tel Brak, Nuzi, and Alalak exceeded their wildest expectations, revealing a society of stunning sophistication and artistic flair. Stepping into the ruins of a Mitanni palace is to walk into a world of vibrant color and intricate design, a stark contrast to the monochrome image of a purely warlike people. At the site of Nuzi, near modern-day Kirkuk in Iraq, archaeologists uncovered a treasure trove that transformed our understanding of Mitanni daily life and lore. The discovery of thousands of cuneiform tablets, written in Akkadian but filled with Hurrian names and terms, provided an intimate look into the mundane yet vital workings of the kingdom. These weren't royal proclamations of conquest, but detailed records of court cases, marriage contracts, business transactions, and property disputes. One fascinating legal practice they reveal is the use of adoption for business purposes. A man without a son might adopt another person to serve as his heir and caretaker in old age, a contract that could be nullified if the adopted son failed in his duties. These tablets paint a picture of a highly organized, bureaucratic society with a complex legal system that governed everything from inheritance to the sale of livestock, proving that Mitanni's sophistication extended far beyond the battlefield. Perhaps the most visually stunning discoveries have been the remnants of Mitanni art. At sites like Tel Brak and Alalak, excavators found walls that had once been alive with color. They uncovered beautiful frescoes depicting elegant courtiers in elaborate robes, mythological scenes of griffins and other fantastic beasts, and intricate geometric patterns. The colors vibrant blues, deep reds, stark whites, and earthy ochres have survived the millennia with remarkable intensity. These were not the crude daubings of a minor culture, but the refined output of master artists, demonstrating a high level of technical skill and aesthetic sensibility. The scenes suggest a courtly life of grace and luxury, where elites surrounded themselves with beauty, a world away from the dust and din of the chariot field. This artistic legacy forces us to completely reconsider the Mitanni adding a dimension of cultural refinement to their reputation as mighty warriors. Further evidence of their advanced urban planning comes from the remains of their infrastructure. Archaeologists have mapped extensive and sophisticated irrigation systems that channeled water from the Haber River to feed the fields of the surrounding plains. This was the engineering backbone that supported the agricultural surplus fueling their economy and military. They've also uncovered the foundations of massive fortifications, thick walls, and imposing gates that protected their administrative centers. Within these walls, the layout of palaces and temples reveals a clear sense of urban order and architectural ambition. One of the most significant finds was a Mitanni-era temple at Tel Brak, a massive structure that underscores the importance of religion in their society and their capacity for organizing large-scale construction projects. These weren't temporary encampments, they were the carefully planned centers of a powerful and settled state. Yet, for every question these discoveries answer, two more seem to arise. The single greatest enigma, the Holy Grail of Mitanni archaeology, remains the location of its magnificent capital, Washukani. Historical texts from Egypt and the Hittites speak of it in glowing terms, a wealthy and formidable city that was the nerve center of the kingdom. But its ruins have never been definitively identified. Scholars have proposed several likely tells in northeastern Syria, with sites like Tel el-Fakaria being a prime candidate. However, modern politics, ongoing conflict, and the simple fact that ancient mounds often contain layers of multiple civilizations have made the search incredibly difficult. Washukani is the silent heart of the mystery, and its discovery would undoubtedly rewrite history, potentially containing the royal archives that could tell the Mitanni story in their own words. Until it is found, a profound piece of the puzzle will remain missing, a constant reminder of how much we still have to learn about this vanished empire. While Mitanni was skillfully managing its southern alliance with Egypt, a storm was gathering in the rugged highlands of Anatolia. The Hittite Empire, long a regional power, was undergoing a dramatic transformation under a new king of unparalleled ambition and strategic genius, Superiority I. He was not merely a conqueror, he was a master of long-term geopolitical chess, and he viewed the Mitanni-Egyptian alliance as the single greatest obstacle to his vision of a Hittite-dominated Near East. His rise to power marked a turning point in Mitanni's fortunes, shifting the diplomatic game from one of delicate balance to one of existential survival. Where previous Hittite rulers had been contained, Superiority was relentless, innovative, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of expansion. He understood that to defeat Mitanni, he would need to do more than win battles. He would need to systematically dismantle the very foundations of its power, and he pursued this goal with a chilling, methodical precision that would ultimately prove devastating. Superiority first and most brilliant move was to exploit a critical weakness that no amount of chariots or gold could fix: the simmering dynastic strife within Mitanni itself. The Mitanni king, Tushratta, faced challenges to his rule from within his own family, particularly from a rival faction led by a noble named Artatama II. Seeing this internal division as a golden opportunity, Superiority did not just observe, he actively intervened. He threw the full weight of Hittite support behind Artatama, recognizing him as a legitimate rival king. This was a masterstroke of political warfare. By fueling a civil war, Superiority forced Tushratta to divert precious military resources and attention away from his external borders to fight a war at home against a Hittite-backed puppet. It drained the kingdom's treasury, fractured the loyalty of the noble class, and created a paralyzing state of political uncertainty. The Hittite king, from his capital of Hattusa, effectively turned Mitanni's own aristocracy into a weapon against itself, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of subversion that was far ahead of its time. With Mitanni now weakened and distracted by internal conflict, Superiority moved to the next phase of his strategy, military invasion designed for maximum psychological and economic impact. Instead of a direct, head-on assault into the Mitanni heartland, he first targeted its wealthy and strategically vital vassal states in northern Syria. Cities like Aleppo, Alalak, and Carchemish were not just peripheral territories, they were the economic lifeblood of the empire, crucial hubs on the trade routes that generated Mitanni's wealth. Superior's armies swept through this region, capturing these cities one by one. The loss was catastrophic. It severed Mitanni's access to the Mediterranean Sea, cut off the flow of taxes and tribute from these wealthy domains, and demonstrated to every other subject state that the Mitanni king could no longer protect them. This campaign was a deliberate act of dismemberment, carefully chopping away the outer limbs of the empire before moving in for the kill on the body. The culmination of this relentless pressure was a daring and devastating deep strike into the very core of Mitanni territory. In a breathtaking display of military audacity, Superior's forces pushed beyond the captured Syrian buffer zones and marched directly on the Mitanni capital itself, the legendary city of Washukani. Historical records, though fragmentary, suggest the city was besieged, captured, and brutally sacked. The psychological blow of this event cannot be overstated. For over a century, Washukani had been an impregnable symbol of Mitanni power, a seat of kings who treated with pharaohs as equals. Its fall was an unimaginable humiliation, a clear signal to the entire world that Mitanni's power was broken. The myth of its invincibility evaporated overnight. While Tushratta himself may have escaped, his authority was irreparably shattered. The capture of the capital was more than a military defeat. It was the decapitation of the Mitanni state, leaving it leaderless, demoralized, and utterly vulnerable to the final, crushing blows that were yet to come. Yet even as Superior's armies tightened their grip from the outside, the kingdom was already rotting from within, torn apart by a cancer of political ambition and fractured loyalty. The very structure that had made Mitanni strong, its feudal system of powerful, land-owning nobles, became the instrument of its unraveling. The Maryannu warrior class, once the unshakable pillar of royal power, began to fracture under the weight of self-interest and competing dynastic claims. When a king died, the question of succession was rarely a smooth transition. It was often a trigger for open warfare between rival branches of the royal family, each backed by their own factions of ambitious nobles who saw a change in ruler as an opportunity to increase their own power and privilege. These were not mere squabbles, they were full-scale civil wars that diverted armies from the borders to fight against kin, draining the treasury and shattering the unity essential to face external threats. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, and Mitanni was splitting at the seams. The catalyst for this fatal disintegration was the bitter rivalry between King Tushratta and his relative, Artatama II. This was far more than a simple family dispute. It was a schism that gave the Hittite king Superior the perfect weapon. By recognizing Artatama as a legitimate king and offering him military support, Superior didn't just back a rival claimant. He effectively created a puppet government in exile, fueling a proxy war that forced Tushratta to fight on two fronts simultaneously. Imagine the paralysis at court, military commanders unsure which noble to trust, resources being diverted to put down rebellions instigated by a foreign power, and a constant cloud of suspicion hanging over every advisor. This internal chaos sent a clear message to Mitanni's vassal states. The central authority was crumbling, and the king could no longer guarantee their protection or enforce their loyalty. The bonds of the empire were breaking, Seizing this opportunity, regional governors and the rulers of subject cities began to act independently, testing the limits of Tushratta's weakened power. Some, dreaming of their own independence, stopped sending their annual tribute, quietly withholding the wealth that funded the Mitanni state and its military. Others went even further, entering into secret negotiations with the Hittites or the resurgent Assyrians, trading their allegiance to a dying empire for promises of autonomy or favor under a new master. This was the ultimate betrayal from within local leaders, who were supposed to be the administrative backbone of the kingdom, actively conspiring with its enemies to ensure their own survival in the new order. The geopolitical map of Mitanni was being redrawn not just by foreign invaders, but by the treacherous calculations of its own most trusted officials. This perfect storm of internal weakness and external pressure created a death spiral from which Mitanni could not recover. Every rebel noble supported by the Hittites further weakened Tushratta, and every defeat Tushratta suffered encouraged more nobles to rebel. The state's ability to coordinate a coherent defense collapsed. Armies that should have been defending the frontiers were bogged down putting out political fires at home. The flow of information and commands, once the lifeblood of a centralized administration, broke down into a trickle of distrust and misinformation. By the time Superiority launched his final, decisive invasion, Mitanni was no longer a unified kingdom capable of mounting a national defense. It was a collection of panicked, isolated fragments, each desperately trying to save itself, ensuring the whole would be lost. The greatest threat to an empire is often not the enemy at the gate, but the enemy within the walls, and Mitanni's walls were filled with them. While the Hittites were systematically dismantling Mitanni from the west, an even more humiliating threat was awakening in the east. For generations, the ancient city-state of Ashur and the lands of Assyria had been forced to bow to Mitanni supremacy, paying heavy tribute and accepting the authority of the great king of Washukani. They were the subdued vassal, the silent partner in an unequal relationship, but beneath the surface, a fierce desire for independence was burning, and it found its perfect leader in a king of extraordinary vision and resolve, Ashur-uballit I. His ascension to the Assyrian throne marked a pivotal moment, the beginning of a national rebirth that would transform a subject territory into a terrifying imperial power. Ashur-uballit understood that true freedom could not be begged for. It had to be forged in iron and seized by force. He initiated a sweeping program of military reform, reorganizing the Assyrian army into a highly disciplined, professional force that could march longer and strike harder than any before it. This was no longer a militia, it was an instrument of conquest, and its first target was its former master. Ashur-uballit's genius, however, extended beyond the battlefield. He was a master of the new diplomatic reality, and he played the game with breathtaking audacity. Recognizing that a weakened Mitanni was vulnerable and that Egypt was a distant but influential power, he took a step that would have been unthinkable just a generation earlier. He began corresponding directly with the Egyptian pharaoh, addressing him not as an inferior but as a fellow great king, his brother and equal. This was a monumental act of political defiance. By inserting himself into the exclusive club of great powers, Ashur-uballit was not just announcing Assyria's return, he was deliberately snubbing Mitanni, publicly demonstrating that its authority was now void and that a new power had arrived to claim its place in the region. The Amarna letters preserve one of these remarkable messages, a bold declaration of parity that effectively erased centuries of Assyrian subservience in a single, stunning diplomatic stroke. With his legitimacy proclaimed and his army hardened, Ashur-uballit turned his gaze westward towards the fertile and now poorly defended heartlands of the crumbling Mitanni Empire. He did not hesitate. Assyrian legions began pushing across the Tigris River, launching a series of ruthless campaigns into the eastern provinces of Hanagalbat, the core Mitanni territory. These were not mere raids for plunder, they were wars of conquest and annihilation. The Assyrians moved with a methodical, brutal efficiency, capturing key cities, slaughtering garrisons, and incorporating the land and its people directly into a growing Assyrian state. Each captured town, each seized granary, and each controlled trade route further drained Mitanni's dwindling resources and shrank its power base. The eastern flank, once a secure and productive region, was now being carved away piece by piece, its wealth redirected to fuel the rise of its former subject. This Assyrian resurgence created an inescapable nightmare scenario for the beleaguered Mitanni kingdom. They were now caught in a devastating pincer movement, squeezed between two relentless enemies. From the north, the Hittite hammer of Superiority was crashing down, sacking cities and shattering armies. From the east, the Assyrian anvil was steadily advancing, methodically absorbing what remained of their territory. There was no front line, no safe haven. Any troops sent to block the Hittite advance left the eastern border undefended, inviting an Assyrian invasion. Conversely, concentrating forces against the Assyrians meant leaving the west open to further Hittite incursions. It was a strategic trap with no exit. The dual assault stretched Mitanni's remaining forces to the breaking point, leading to demoralization, desertion, and ultimate collapse. The once mighty kingdom that had dictated terms to pharaohs was now being dismembered by the very powers it had once dominated, a stark and brutal lesson in the volatile nature of ancient geopolitics. And so we see Mitanni caught in a devastating vice, crushed between the relentless military machines of the Hittites and the Assyrians. But what if these human adversaries were not acting alone? What if they had a silent, invisible accomplice, one that was weakening the kingdom from within long before the first enemy soldier crossed its borders? A growing body of evidence suggests that the very environment upon which Mitanni depended was turning against it. While kings plotted and armies marched, a more fundamental crisis may have been unfolding in the fields and river valleys that fed the empire. The story of Mitanni's fall is not just one of betrayal and battlefield defeat. It is also a story of climate. Scientists who study ancient climates, known as paleoclimatologists, have developed ingenious methods to peer into the atmospheric conditions of the distant past. By analyzing layers of sediment from the bottom of lakes and the sea, or by examining the growth rings in very old trees and even stalagmites from caves, they can reconstruct a picture of rainfall, temperature, and weather patterns from thousands of years ago. The data emerging from these natural archives points to a startling conclusion. The Late Bronze Age, the precise period of Mitanni's collapse, was marked by a significant and prolonged shift towards a drier, more arid climate across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. This was not merely a few bad seasons. It was a mega-drought, a climatic event that could have stretched for decades, fundamentally altering the landscape upon which agricultural societies were built. For a civilization like Mitanni, whose wealth and power were so deeply rooted in the fertile plains of the Haber River Valley, such a change would have been catastrophic. Their entire economy and ability to feed a concentrated population relied on predictable rainfall and river levels to water their crops of barley and wheat. A prolonged drought would have meant consecutive years of crop failure. The grain stores in the royal granaries, the very reserves that were meant to see the kingdom through lean times and supply its armies, would have begun to empty. The price of basic food staples would have skyrocketed, pushing the poorest and most vulnerable citizens to the brink of starvation. Famine would not have been a mere possibility. It would have been an inevitability, striking at the heart of the social contract between the king and his people. This environmental pressure would have acted as a multiplier for every other crisis Mitanni faced. Imagine a noble, already tempted by Hittite promises of power, now watching the fields on his estate wither and die. His wealth, derived from agricultural surplus, evaporates. His ability to maintain his chariots, horses, and retainers diminishes. When a Hittite agent approaches him with an offer of support in exchange for his allegiance, the decision becomes much easier. The drought eroded the economic foundation of the loyal noble class, making them more susceptible to treason. For the common people, hunger breeds desperation and anger. A population worried about its next meal is not a population that will rally unquestioningly to the defense of a distant king, especially one who is seen as having failed in his most basic duty, to ensure the fertility of the land and the protection of his people. Social unrest, riots, and a loss of faith in the ruling dynasty would have been a natural consequence, further fracturing the kingdom from within. Furthermore, this climatic shift was not a localized event only affecting Mitanni. It was a regional phenomenon, creating a desperate, system-wide crisis often referred to by historians as the Late Bronze Age collapse. Every kingdom from Greece to Mesopotamia was feeling the same pressures. This context is crucial. When the Hittites launched their invasions, they too were likely facing food shortages and internal strain. Their aggression can be seen in part as a response to this scarcity, a desperate attempt to seize the resources of others to compensate for their own deficits. The same goes for the Assyrians. The competition for fertile land and reliable food sources became a zero-sum game of survival, intensifying conflicts and making diplomacy even more fraught. The climate did not cause the wars, but it set the stage for them, turning political rivalries into existential fights for resources. The silent, creeping stress of drought also crippled Mitanni's capacity for recovery. A kingdom can survive a military defeat if it has the resources to raise a new army, rebuild its fortifications, and care for its people. But a kingdom already sapped by years of poor harvests has no resilience. There is no surplus grain to feed refugees fleeing captured territories. There is no treasure to hire mercenaries. There is no physical strength in the population to undertake major construction projects to repair damaged city walls. Each blow from an external enemy landed on a body that was already malnourished and weakened. The environmental crisis became the unseen background condition that ensured every political and military setback was magnified, pushing the entire system closer to a tipping point from which it could not return. The story of Mitanni's end, therefore, must be woven from two threads: the dark ambition of human empires and the indifferent, transformative power of a changing world. For a time, the Mitanni war chariot was the undisputed master of the ancient battlefield, a lightweight, swift platform of death that could strike with terrifying speed and vanish before a counterattack could be organized. This technological edge was their spear and their shield, the very foundation of their empire. But in the brutal calculus of warfare, no advantage lasts forever. The story of Mitanni's military decline is a classic tale of innovation and adaptation, where yesterday's revolutionary weapon becomes today's obsolete target. Their rivals, particularly the Hittites and Assyrians, were not passive observers. They were keen students of war, and they dedicated immense resources to solving the puzzle of Mitanni's dominance. They began a deliberate process of reverse engineering, improving, and ultimately surpassing the very technology that had once cowed them. The most significant shift came in the fundamental design philosophy of the chariot itself. Where the Mitanni prized speed and agility above all else, fielding lightweight vehicles that carried a driver and a single archer, the Hittites pioneered a new, heavier class of chariot. Theirs were built for shock and awe. Constructed with a sturdier frame and larger wheels, these Hittite machines could carry a 3-person crew, a driver, a shield bearer to protect them, and a spearman or archer. This wasn't just a minor tweak, it was a complete reimagining of the chariot's role on the battlefield. The Mitanni chariot was a skirmisher, designed to harass and break formations from a distance. The Hittite chariot was a mobile assault platform, capable of crashing into enemy lines and unleashing a concentrated attack at close quarters. This heavier design neutralized the Mitanni's primary advantage of mobility, turning the chariot duel into a brutal clash where mass and manpower often prevailed. This arms race extended far beyond the chariot frame. Advancements in metallurgy played a crucial role in shifting the balance of power. The Mitanni's composite bow, once a terrifyingly unique weapon, began to be replicated and deployed by their enemies. More importantly, armor technology leaped forward. The Hittites and Assyrians developed larger, more effective shields and began outfitting their soldiers, including chariot crews-in scaled armor made from bronze or hardened leather. This improved personal protection directly countered the lethality of the Mitanni archer. An arrow that might have been fatal to an unarmored warrior could now be deflected or absorbed, dramatically increasing the survivability of the troops who had to face the Mitanni onslaught. The very projectiles that had once sown panic now found themselves meeting a new, more resilient defense. Perhaps the most devastating innovation adopted by Mitanni's enemies was in the dark art of siege warfare. The Mitanni kingdom was protected by a network of formidable fortified cities, Washukani, Tate, and others, whose thick walls had long been considered impregnable. Their military strategy was built around meeting threats in the open field with their chariots, never truly anticipating a scenario where their urban centers would be directly and successfully assaulted. The Hittites, under Superiority, became masters of the siege. They employed sophisticated techniques like building massive earthen ramps to scale walls, using battering rams to break down gates, and employing tunneling operations to undermine fortifications until they collapsed. This capability completely changed the strategic game. The Mitanni could no longer retreat behind their walls as a last resort. Those walls were now a target. The capture of their capital, Washukani, was the ultimate demonstration of this new reality, a shocking event that proved their entire defensive doctrine was obsolete. The tragic irony for Mitanni is that they themselves had provided the blueprint for their own obsolescence. The famous Kikuli text, their horse training manual, was found not in a Mitanni library but in the archives of the Hittite capital, Hattusa. Their rivals had literally taken their playbook, studied it, and then improved upon it. This failure to maintain their technological lead points to a deeper strategic rigidity. While the Hittites and Assyrians were actively innovating, the Mitanni appear to have become complacent, relying on a system that had brought them centuries of success without anticipating how it might be countered. In a world that was rapidly evolving, they were left behind, still fielding the brilliant weapon of their grandfather's era against enemies who were already fighting the wars of the future. Their chariots, once the symbol of invincibility, became rolling tombs, outmatched and outthought on the very fields they had once dominated. Of all the tantalizing mysteries surrounding the Mitanni kingdom, none is more compelling or more frustrating than the search for its very heart, the legendary capital city of Washukani. This was not some minor provincial town. Historical texts from both allies and enemies describe it as a magnificent center of power, a wealthy and heavily fortified royal seat from which the great kings ruled their empire. Its name itself is thought to mean wealthy or beautiful, a testament to its splendor. The Amarna letters are filled with references to it, and the Hittite accounts of its sacking by Superiority the first paint a picture of a prize of immense value. Yet today, this city that once dictated terms to pharaohs has vanished without a trace. Its location one of the most enduring and captivating puzzles in the entire field of archaeology. The challenge of finding Washukani is immense, rooted in the very nature of its disappearance and the passage of time. When a city is destroyed by war or natural disaster, it typically leaves behind a clear archaeological layer, a horizon of ash, collapsed walls, and debris that tells a story of sudden catastrophe. But Washukani's end seems to have been different. It was likely not just destroyed but systematically abandoned and then forgotten over centuries. Its mud brick walls, the primary building material of the region, would have slowly melted back into the earth under wind and rain. Later settlements would have been built directly on top of its ruins, obscuring its footprint. The most likely scenario is that the great city of Washukani is not a lonely mound waiting in an empty field, but is buried deep beneath a more modern town, its secrets protected by layers of subsequent history. This has led to a vibrant and sometimes contentious debate among archaeologists, with several compelling candidates put forward over the years. One of the most prominent is Tel el-Fakaria, a large tell or settlement mound located in northeastern Syria, near the headwaters of the Haber River. This site is strategically well placed and shows evidence of significant occupation during the Mitanni period. Another strong candidate is Tel Hamukar, further to the east, which boasts massive ancient fortifications. Yet, despite intriguing clues, neither site has yielded that one undeniable piece of evidence, a royal inscription, a tablet explicitly naming the city, or the unmistakable layout of a Mitanni-era palace complex that would allow for a definitive identification. The search is like trying to find a specific, famous book in a vast library where all the spines have been ripped off. You know the content must be there, but without the label, it remains hidden in plain sight. The political and practical difficulties of modern times have also severely hampered the search. The most likely regions for Washukani's location lie within northeastern Syria and southeastern Turkey, areas that have experienced significant instability and conflict over recent decades. Archaeological fieldwork is impossible during times of war, and even in periods of peace, gaining access and funding for large-scale excavations in these areas is incredibly challenging. Furthermore, the use of modern technology like ground-penetrating radar or satellite imagery, while helpful, can only provide hints and anomalies. There is no substitute for the slow, meticulous work of the trowel and brush, the careful sifting of soil that is needed to finally confirm the city's identity. The lost capital is not just hidden by earth, it is hidden by the tumultuous currents of contemporary history. Discovering Washukani would be so much more than just ticking a box on a map. It would be the key that unlocks the entire Mitanni civilization. A capital city is a time capsule of an empire's soul. Within its ruins, archaeologists would hope to find the ultimate prize, the royal archives. While we have administrative tablets from provincial centers like Nuzi, the royal archives from Washukani would contain the state's deepest secrets, the original copies of treaties with Egypt and the Hittites, the personal correspondence of its kings, detailed economic records, and perhaps even religious and literary texts written in their own Hurrian language. This would allow us to hear the Mitanni story told in their own voice, rather than through the biased accounts of their enemies. It would settle historical debates, reveal the intricacies of their government, and finally give a full, rich voice to a people who have been silent for over 3,000 years. The enduring mystery of Washukani is a powerful symbol of the Mitanni kingdom itself, grand, influential, and yet hauntingly elusive. Its absence is a constant reminder of how fragile our connection to the past can be, and how even the greatest cities can be swallowed by time. The ongoing quest to find it drives archaeologists and historians forward, a testament to our enduring need to solve history's great puzzles and complete the story of humanity. Every shovel of dirt turned in the Haba region brings with it the hope that this time it will reveal the glint of gold, the impression of a forgotten seal, or the corner of a tablet that finally whispers the name of the beautiful city, ending its long silence and bringing a lost empire back into the light. By the turn of the 13th century BC, the mighty kingdom of Mitanni was caught in an inescapable downward spiral, its final collapse unfolding with a speed that must have stunned the ancient world. The timeline of its dissolution is not a simple, linear story of a single battle lost, but a cascading series of catastrophes that fed upon one another, accelerating the kingdom's descent into oblivion. The initial and most devastating blow was undoubtedly the Hittite sack of the capital, Washukani, by the forces of the brilliant and ruthless King Superiority I. This was far more than a military setback. It was a profound psychological and political earthquake. The capture of the royal seat shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Mitanni kings for generations and demonstrated to every vassal state and rival noble that the central power could no longer protect its own heart, let alone its outer territories. In the bloody aftermath of the capital's fall, the kingdom fractured irrevocably. The Hittites, master strategists that they were, had no intention of administering the entire Mitanni empire themselves. Instead, they implemented a classic divide and rule strategy, installing their own puppet king from the rival royal line they had been supporting for years. This created a schism that paralyzed any hope of a unified resistance. For a period, there were effectively two Mitannis, a western rump state controlled by the Hittite vassal king, and a shrinking eastern territory still loyal to the remnants of the original dynasty. This internal division was a gift to their enemies, as the rival factions were often more focused on fighting each other than on confronting the external threats closing in from all sides. The civil war consumed the last of the kingdom's resources and manpower, leaving the borders undefended and inviting the final, decisive invasion. That final blow came from the east, from the resurgent Assyrians under their determined king, Adad-nirari I. Seeing the Mitanni state torn apart by Hittite manipulation and internal strife, the Assyrian armies launched a full-scale invasion, sweeping into the vulnerable eastern provinces. The Assyrian campaign was one of outright conquest and assimilation, not mere plunder or temporary domination. They systematically captured the remaining Mitanni strongholds, dismantled the local power structures, and incorporated the land directly into the growing Assyrian Empire. The last vestiges of an independent Mitanni ruling class were eradicated or fled into exile. Within the span of just a few decades, the once great empire that had treated with pharaohs as an equal was completely erased from the political map, its territory neatly partitioned between the Hittite sphere of influence in the west and the new Assyrian possessions in the east. The royal line simply vanishes from the historical record, fading into an obscurity so complete that we do not even know the fate of its last members. The astonishing speed of this collapse points to a convergence of disasters, a perfect storm where every single pillar of the state failed simultaneously. The military was outmatched by technologically superior and strategically smarter enemies. The economy, starved of trade and crippled by the loss of tributary states, could no longer fund a defense. The political structure was hollowed out from within by betrayal and dynastic conflict, and weaving through it all, the mounting evidence suggests an environmental stressor, a prolonged regional drought that undermined agriculture, sparked famine, and eroded the social stability necessary to withstand such immense external pressures. The Mitanni kingdom did not just slowly decline, it underwent a systemic failure where each crisis amplified the next until the entire complex structure shattered under the weight. Its story stands as a powerful testament to the fragility of even the most brilliant civilizations when confronted by a synchronized assault on every front of their existence. Yet, even as the Mitanni kingdom vanished from the political map, its cultural DNA did not simply disappear. Instead, it underwent a remarkable process of diffusion and absorption, seeping into the very fabric of the civilizations that had conquered it. The Hittites, who had worked so ruthlessly to dismantle the Mitanni state, became perhaps its most enthusiastic students and preservers. In their capital of Hattusa, archaeologists have found a treasure trove of Hurrian texts and rituals, meticulously copied and translated by Hittite scribes. Entire myths like the epic Song of Kumarbi, which tells a story of generational conflict among the gods that echoes later Greek mythology, were preserved not in Mitanni itself, but in the archives of its destroyers. The Hittite pantheon enthusiastically adopted key Hurrian deities. The storm god Teshub and the sun goddess Hepat were given prominent places in the Hittite religious landscape, their worship integrated into state ceremonies. This was not a simple act of plagiarism, but a profound form of respect. The Hittites seemed to recognize the spiritual and cultural sophistication of the people they had defeated, absorbing their divine patrons as a way to legitimize their own rule over the former Mitanni lands and to harness the perceived power of these ancient gods. This cultural exchange flowed powerfully into the realm of daily life and language as well. The Hurrian language, spoken by the majority of the Mitanni population, did not vanish with the fall of Washukani. Instead, it persisted for centuries as a living tongue in parts of Syria and Anatolia. More importantly, it left a permanent mark on the Hittite lexicon. Hurrian words, particularly terms related to horse training, chariotry, and specific religious concepts, were borrowed directly into the Hittite language. The famous horse training manual by Kikuli, written in a Hittite dialect but filled with Hurrian technical terms like akun for one turn or terrier for three, is the perfect symbol of this transfer. The conquerors had to use the language of the conquered to understand their most prized military secrets. This linguistic legacy shows that assimilation is a two-way street. The Hittites may have won the war, but in their daily routines and specialized practices, they were still speaking the language, quite literally, of the Mitanni masters they had replaced. To the east, the rising Assyrian Empire proved to be another unexpected vessel for Mitanni's enduring influence. The Assyrians, who had so fiercely asserted their independence and then conquered the Mitanni heartland, were deeply impressed by the artistic and iconographic styles they encountered. Mitanni motifs, once confined to the palaces of Washukani, began to appear in the art of the early Assyrian Empire. The vibrant, colorful frescoes that had adorned Mitanni walls, featuring elegant figures, griffins, and intricate geometric patterns, influenced early Assyrian mural painting and seal carving. The distinctive style of Mitanni cylinder seals, with their elaborate and finely detailed scenes, was adopted and adapted by Assyrian artisans. Even certain artistic conventions in depicting royalty and the divine show a clear debt to Mitanni predecessors. This was not a case of mere imitation, but of creative adaptation. The Assyrians took these foreign artistic ideas and fused them with their own distinct aesthetic, creating something new and powerful, yet one that still carried the ghost of the Mitanni artistic spirit within it. The visual language of empire in Mesopotamia was forever enriched by this unacknowledged inheritance. The most practical and widespread legacy of Mitanni, however, was undoubtedly its revolutionary approach to warfare and horsemanship. The knowledge encapsulated in the Kikuli text did not remain a secret held by the Hittites. It became the foundational textbook for chariot warfare across the entire late Bronze Age world. The rigorous, almost scientific methods for conditioning horses, the precise dietary requirements, and the detailed training schedules were adopted by the armies of Egypt, the city-states of Canaan, and the kingdoms of the Aegean. The Mitanni had unlocked a systematic approach to maximizing the potential of the horse and chariot, and this knowledge became an indispensable part of the military toolkit for every major power that followed. Their innovation elevated the entire technology of warfare, forcing everyone to adapt to a new standard. In this way, long after the last Mitanni king had fallen, the thunder of their chariot wheels continued to echo on battlefields from Megiddo to Troy, their greatest contribution to ancient combat living on through the armies of their rivals and successors. Finally, in the centuries that followed, new waves of people, such as the Arameans, moved into the territories once ruled by Mitanni. They settled upon the same lands, often in the same cities, and inherited the blended cultural landscape left behind by the interaction of Hurrian, Mesopotamian, and Indo-European traditions. Elements of Hurrian religion and mythology likely filtered into the beliefs of these new populations, becoming part of the deep, syncretic substratum of Near Eastern culture. The story of Mitanni's end is therefore not one of pure erasure but of metamorphosis. Its political structure was dismantled, its cities abandoned, and its name forgotten. But its people, their knowledge, their gods, and their art were woven into the cultural tapestry of the Hittites, the Assyrians, and beyond. The kingdom vanished, but its legacy became a silent, enduring thread in the intricate pattern of human history, a powerful reminder that conquest is rarely absolute, and that the culture of the defeated often holds a power that outlasts the might of the conqueror's army. So how do we untangle this web of causes to understand what truly brought down a mighty empire? The debate among historians often centers on a classic divide. Was it primarily human ambition and conflict, or did uncontrollable natural forces play the decisive role? On one side of the argument, the case for human agency is overwhelming and meticulously documented. We have the clear historical narrative of the Hittite king Superior's calculated and ruthless campaign of subversion and invasion, a masterclass in geopolitical sabotage that exploited Mitanni's internal divisions. We have the simultaneous resurgence of Assyria under Ashur-uballit, a former vassal that saw its chance for revenge and expansion, systematically carving away the eastern half of the kingdom. This relentless military pressure from two powerful enemies created an inescapable pincer movement that would have challenged even the most robust state. Furthermore, the internal political fragmentation, the dynastic squabbles, and the betrayal by disloyal nobles and vassal states represent a catastrophic failure of leadership and social cohesion from within. This school of thought argues that the kingdom was quite literally hacked apart by the swords and ambitions of its neighbors and its own elite, a victim of pure realpolitik and the volatile power struggles of the Bronze Age. Yet, the opposing perspective asks a compelling question. Why did Mitanni, which had weathered crises and rivals for centuries, suddenly become so vulnerable to these exact pressures at this specific moment in time? This is where the theory of natural disasters and climate change enters the picture, adding a crucial layer of depth to the story. Paleoclimatologists, scientists who study ancient climates, have uncovered evidence of a significant and prolonged drought event that affected the entire eastern Mediterranean around the time of Mitanni's collapse. By analyzing sediment cores from lakes and examining growth rings in ancient trees, they have built a picture of a world turning drier and more arid. For an empire like Mitanni, whose economy and food supply were utterly dependent on the fertile plains of the Haber River Valley, a decades-long mega-drought would have been absolutely devastating. Consecutive crop failures would have led to famine, soaring food prices, and widespread social unrest. A population starving and desperate is far less likely to rally behind a distant king, making them more susceptible to the promises of rebel factions or foreign invaders. The drought wouldn't have just caused hunger, it would have eroded the very tax base and agricultural surplus that funded the military, maintained the loyalty of the Maryannu nobility, and allowed the state to function. Beyond climate, another natural threat may have literally shaken the foundations of Mitanni society: earthquakes. The region sits within a seismically active zone, and archaeologists have occasionally found evidence of sudden, violent destruction at some sites that is characteristic of seismic activity. While not necessarily a primary cause of collapse, a major earthquake striking a key city like the capital Washukani could have been a crippling blow from which the kingdom struggled to recover. Imagine the psychological impact of the gods themselves seemingly turning against the state, destroying its mighty walls and temples in a single violent event. The resources needed for reconstruction would have been immense, diverting manpower and treasure away from national defense at the worst possible moment, leaving the kingdom exposed and bleeding at the very instant its enemies were gathering strength. A natural disaster of this magnitude could have been the trigger that set the entire cascade of failure in motion. In the end, the most compelling explanation is not a choice between these options but a recognition of their terrifying synergy. This is known as a systems collapse model, where multiple stressors converge to overwhelm a civilization's resilience. Think of Mitanni not as a kingdom brought down by a single knockout punch, but as a strong fighter succumbing to a combination of blows, each one weakening its defenses for the next. The prolonged drought strained the economy and sparked social discontent, making the population less united and the state poorer. This internal vulnerability made the political betrayals and dynastic conflicts more likely and more damaging. This internal fragmentation, in turn, made the kingdom a far easier target for the external military campaigns of the Hittites and Assyrians. The human agents of destruction, the ambitious kings and treacherous nobles, were effectively capitalizing on a kingdom that had already been profoundly weakened by environmental pressures it could not control. The truth behind the disappearance of the Mitanni kingdom likely lies in this perfect storm, a tragic convergence of human ambition and natural catastrophe that illustrates the profound interconnectedness of history, climate, and the fragile nature of even the most powerful civilizations. The dramatic fall of the Mitanni kingdom offers us far more than just an ancient mystery. It provides a powerful and sobering case study in the inherent fragility of even the most brilliant civilizations. Their story is a stark reminder that prosperity and military might are not permanent conditions but fleeting moments in time, constantly vulnerable to a complex web of internal and external pressures. What makes their collapse so instructive is that it wasn't caused by a single, catastrophic event, but by a perfect storm of interconnected failures. Their diplomatic alliances, once their greatest shield, became a source of fatal vulnerability when their partners grew distracted. Their revolutionary military technology was eventually matched and then surpassed by their rivals. Their economy, though robust in times of peace, was exquisitely sensitive to disruptions in trade and agriculture, and weaving through it all, evidence suggests a changing climate may have strained their resources and amplified social unrest. The Mitanni did not necessarily do anything wrong. Rather, they encountered a convergence of challenges that overwhelmed their capacity to adapt, demonstrating that stability is never a guaranteed state but a delicate balance that requires constant vigilance and flexibility. This ancient narrative holds up a mirror to our own modern world, revealing unsettling parallels that resonate across the millennia. Today, we face our own set of interconnected global challenges: climate change-induced droughts and extreme weather, intense geopolitical rivalries between major powers, and an economic system deeply reliant on complex, fragile supply chains that span the globe. Just as the Mitanni's prosperity depended on trade routes that could be severed by a Hittite army, our modern economies are vulnerable to disruptions from pandemics, political conflicts, or cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. The competition for essential resources like water, energy, and rare earth minerals echoes the ancient struggles over fertile land and tin mines that fueled Bronze Age conflicts. The Mitanni's experience teaches us that no nation, no matter how advanced, is an island. Our fates are inextricably linked in a global system, and a crisis in one part of the world can quickly ripple outward, creating cascading effects that impact everyone. Their history urges us to look beyond short-term gains and consider the long-term resilience of our own societies in the face of systemic risks. Perhaps the most crucial lesson from Mitanni is the paramount importance of adaptability. For centuries, they were the innovators, the masters of chariot warfare, and the architects of a shrewd diplomatic network. Their success, however, seems to have bred a certain degree of complacency. While the Hittites and Assyrians were actively studying, reverse engineering, and improving upon Mitanni technology and tactics, the Mitanni themselves appear to have relied on a system that had always worked before. They failed to innovate quickly enough to maintain their military edge, and their political system proved too rigid to manage the internal fractures exploited by their enemies. In our rapidly evolving world, this lesson is more relevant than ever. The ability to anticipate change, to learn from others, and to pivot strategies in response to new threats is not just a competitive advantage, it is an essential skill for survival. The societies that endure are not necessarily the strongest or the wealthiest at any given moment, but the most agile and responsive to a changing environment. Ultimately, the silent ruins of Washukani and the scattered clay tablets that are all that remain of the Mitanni stand as a permanent monument to the cycles of history. Their rise and fall is not a unique story but part of a recurring pattern in the human experience. Empires ascend, reach a dazzling zenith, and eventually recede, often leaving behind cultural legacies that are absorbed by their successors. This is not a cause for despair, but for perspective. It encourages a sense of humility about our own place in history and a deeper appreciation for the intricate tapestry of causes and effects that shape human destiny. The story of Mitanni challenges us to think beyond the headlines of the day and consider the long arc of time, recognizing that the choices we make today about how we manage our resources, how we engage with other nations, and how we prepare for unforeseen challenges will echo far into the future, just as the choices of the Mitanni kings still speak to us from the dust of 3,000 years. For centuries, the kingdom of Mitanni existed only as a ghost in the historical record, a name whispered in the boastful inscriptions of Egyptian pharaohs and the meticulous annals of Hittite kings. Its story was a puzzle with almost all the pieces missing, a civilization that had been effectively written out of history by its conquerors. The spark of its modern rediscovery was lit not in a field under the Middle Eastern sun, but in the dusty, silent archives of European museums and libraries. It began with the decipherment of cuneiform script in the 19th century, an intellectual key that finally unlocked the ancient languages of Mesopotamia. As scholars pored over newly translated texts, a curious pattern emerged. They kept encountering references to a powerful kingdom called Mitanni, a land of skilled charioteers whose kings addressed the pharaohs of Egypt as brothers. These scattered clues, found in the diplomatic letters of the Amarna archive and the victory stelae of forgotten battles, presented a tantalizing mystery. Here was a major empire, a pivotal player in the Bronze Age world, that had somehow vanished from human memory, leaving behind only these cryptic footnotes in the histories of its rivals. The hunt was on to find the physical evidence that would bring this shadow kingdom back into the light. This intellectual curiosity soon drew adventurous souls into the field, pioneering archaeologists who braved harsh conditions and political complexities to search for Mitanni in the landscapes of the modern Middle East. One of the most flamboyant and determined of these figures was the German baron and amateur archaeologist Max von Oppenheim. In the early 20th century, he became obsessed with the tells, or ancient mounds, of northeastern Syria. His excavations at Tel Halaf, though initially focused on a later Aramean settlement, unearthed cultural layers and artifacts that hinted at the older Hurrian and Mitanni influences in the region. While he never definitively found Washukani, his work, and that of contemporaries like Edward Chiera at the site of Nuzi in Iraq, began to paint a physical picture of this lost culture. At Nuzi, the discovery of thousands of cuneiform tablets was a watershed moment. These were not royal proclamations, but the mundane records of daily life contracts, marriage agreements, court cases, and business inventories. Written in Akkadian but peppered with Hurrian names and terms, these tablets provided an incredibly intimate glimpse into the society, economy, and legal systems of the Mitanni sphere, proving that this was not a myth but a complex, functioning state. The post-World War II era ushered in a new age of scientific archaeology, and with it, a more precise understanding of Mitanni's material culture. Excavations at sites like Tel Brak and Tel Alalak, led by figures such as Max Mallowan and later teams from institutions like the University of London, uncovered the stunning visual world of the Mitanni. They found palaces with walls still adorned by vibrant frescoes depicting elegant courtiers and mythical scenes, their colors remarkably preserved. They uncovered workshops for glassmaking and metallurgy, and the distinctive, finely painted Nuzi ware pottery that became a hallmark of the period. Each season of digging added another brushstroke to the portrait. The discovery of a Mitanni-era temple at Tel Brak, a massive structure that spoke to the importance of organized religion, further solidified the image of a sophisticated and powerful kingdom. These archaeologists were no longer just digging up artifacts. They were reconstructing a way of life, brick by brick, fragment by fragment. This scholarly fascination could not be contained within academic journals. The compelling narrative of a lost empire, complete with elite chariot warriors and a vanished capital, proved irresistible to the public imagination. Popular books by authors like Amanda Podany, who brought the Amarna letters to life, and documentaries produced by major networks began to feature Mitanni as a central mystery of the ancient world. Museums around the globe started to showcase Mitanni artifacts, exquisite cylinder seals, colorful glass vessels, and replicas of the Kikulai horse text in their exhibits on the Bronze Age. The kingdom's story, once known only to a handful of specialists, began to captivate a global audience. It offered a perfect blend of high-stakes diplomacy, military innovation, and a dramatic, unsolved disappearance, appealing to anyone intrigued by history's greatest puzzles. Today, the quest to understand Mitanni is more vibrant than ever, driven by a new generation of researchers employing 21st-century tools. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar survey vast landscapes from above, identifying potential sites for the lost capital of Washukani without ever breaking ground. Interdisciplinary collaborations bring together archaeologists, geneticists, and climatologists who analyze soil samples, animal bones, and ancient plant remains to understand the environmental pressures the kingdom faced. This ongoing investigation is a powerful testament to humanity's deep and enduring need to connect with its past, to rescue entire worlds from oblivion through a combination of painstaking scholarship, cutting-edge technology, and an insatiable curiosity. The story of Mitanni is no longer one of silence, but of a conversation across millennia, a dialogue that continues to reveal new secrets about the fragile nature of power and the enduring legacy of a forgotten empire. Even after more than a century of modern research, the vanished kingdom of Mitanni remains a hotbed of scholarly debate, a living conversation where every new discovery seems to raise more questions than it answers. At the very heart of this ongoing inquiry is a fundamental and fiercely contested question: what was the single most decisive factor in the empire's downfall? One camp of historians, often called the traditionalists, points an unwavering finger at external military aggression. For them, the story is clear-cut. The brilliant, ruthless campaigns of the Hittite king Superiority I, followed by the opportunistic invasion of the resurgent Assyrians, were the undeniable death knell. They argue that the kingdom was simply overpowered by superior force and strategic cunning, a victim of the brutal, zero-sum power politics of the late Bronze Age. This view is heavily supported by the surviving historical records, the Hittite annals that boast of sacking Washukani, and the Assyrian inscriptions that celebrate their conquest of Hanagalbat. The case seems straightforward. Mitanni was carved up by its enemies. However, a different school of thought challenges this narrative of a healthy state struck down by an external hammer blow. These scholars argue that the kingdom was already critically ill from within, and the foreign invasions were merely the final, opportunistic infection that attacked a weakened body. They point to the persistent evidence of internal strife, the devastating dynastic wars between Tushratta and his rival Artatama II, backed by Hittite gold. This internal fragmentation, they suggest, shattered the political unity essential for mounting a coherent national defense. A kingdom tearing itself apart in a civil war cannot possibly present a united front against two of the most formidable military machines of the ancient world. From this perspective, the Hittites and Assyrians didn't defeat a mighty empire. They simply mopped up the pieces of a state that had already collapsed under the weight of its own internal contradictions. Adding a compelling and modern layer to this debate is the increasingly powerful evidence from the field of paleoclimatology. A growing number of researchers now posit that neither the external nor the internal human actors tell the complete story. They suggest that a prolonged regional megadrought may have been the silent, underlying stressor that set the entire collapse in motion. Scientific data drawn from sediment cores and ancient tree rings indicates a significant shift towards a drier, more arid climate across the Near East precisely during the period of Mitanni's decline. This environmental catastrophe would have led to consecutive crop failures, famine, and economic collapse. A starving population is a desperate one, less likely to remain loyal to a distant king, and more susceptible to the promises of rebels or invaders. This theory doesn't replace the others but rather connects them, proposing that climate change was the kindling that made the kingdom so vulnerable to the sparks of invasion and internal betrayal. It presents a more complex, systems collapse model where human and environmental disasters converge to create a perfect storm. Beyond the question of why Mitanni fell lies the equally tantalizing mystery of where its heart once beat, the location of its magnificent capital, Washukani. This is not some academic triviality. Finding the city would be the key that unlocks the entire civilization. The debate over its location is a fascinating blend of textual analysis, archaeological survey, and plain old deduction. Some scholars champion Tel el-Fakariya in northeastern Syria, a large and strategically placed mound that has yielded artifacts from the correct period. Others argue for Tel Hamukar or various other candidates, Each potential site has its champions and its detractors, and the discussion is often fueled by fragmentary clues rather than definitive proof. The ongoing political instability in the region has tragically paused the physical search, leaving the question to be debated in university lecture halls and academic papers. Until a team can definitively identify the royal archives of Washukani, a treasure trove that would contain the Mitanni's own version of events, this debate will remain one of archaeology's most compelling cold cases. Finally, historians vigorously debate the true scale and nature of Mitanni's cultural legacy. Was it a brilliant but fleeting flash in the pan, its innovations quickly absorbed and rebranded by its conquerors, or did it leave a deeper, more enduring imprint on the course of ancient history? We can clearly see its technical influence in the widespread adoption of its horse training techniques and chariot technology, which became the standard across the late Bronze Age world. We can trace its artistic motifs in the early art of the Assyrian Empire, but what about its less tangible contributions? How much of Hurrian religious thought preserved by the Hittites found its way into the mythologies of later cultures? The debate continues because cultural influence is a ghostly thing, incredibly difficult to measure with any precision. Each new analysis of a Hittite text or an Assyrian seal brings us a little closer to understanding just how much the world that came after was shaped by the kingdom that vanished. While the kingdom of Mitanni may be a footnote in most history books, its compelling blend of mystery and might has carved out a unique niche in the landscape of popular culture, offering a fresh and exotic backdrop for storytellers tired of the well-trodden paths of Egypt and Rome. You won't find Mitanni blockbusters dominating the summer box office, but for those who know where to look, its legacy thrives in the pages of historical fiction, the strategic depths of video games, and the intricate plots of graphic novels. Authors are particularly drawn to its enigmatic qualities, a powerful empire that simply vanishes, a lost capital waiting to be discovered, and a society of elite charioteers whose skills bordered on the legendary. This provides a perfect sandbox for narrative exploration, allowing writers to weave tales of intrigue, adventure, and discovery within a setting that feels both ancient and entirely unexplored. The realm of video games has proven to be a particularly fertile ground for Mitanni's digital resurrection. Strategy games like the Total War franchise, which allow players to command vast ancient armies, often include the Mitanni as a playable faction, highlighting their signature military prowess. In these games, players can take command of the Maryannu chariot corps, experiencing a virtual recreation of the combined arms tactics that made them so fearsome on the battlefield. Other titles, especially those in the 4X genre, which stands for explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate, place the kingdom within the complex diplomatic web of the Bronze Age, tasking players with navigating alliances with Egypt and holding off the rising threat of the Hittites. These portrayals, while simplified for gameplay, serve a crucial purpose. They introduce the name Mitanni to millions of players who might otherwise never encounter it, sparking curiosity that often leads to a deeper dive into the actual history behind the pixels. Historical novelists, too, have found rich material in the Mitanni's dramatic story. The Amarna letters, with their intimate glimpses into royal correspondence filled with flattery, threats, and very human anxieties, provide a fantastic framework for character-driven drama. A novel might follow the journey of a Mitanni princess sent to a foreign court to marry an Egyptian pharaoh, exploring the personal sacrifice and political cunning behind these diplomatic marriages. Another might focus on a scribe or a charioteer caught in the escalating tensions between Superiority and Tushrata, offering a ground-level view of the empire's collapse. These fictional accounts inevitably take creative liberties, compressing timelines or inventing personal relationships to serve the narrative. Yet, at their best, they breathe life into the dusty fragments of the past, giving modern audiences an emotional entry point into a world that is 3,000 years removed from our own. Perhaps the most intriguing appearances are the subtlest ones, where Mitanni's influence is felt as an echo rather than a direct presence. A fantasy author might create a culture clearly inspired by the Mitanni, with a horse-loving aristocracy and a storm god at the head of its pantheon. A role-playing game might feature a lost city named Washukani, its ruins filled with ancient secrets and forgotten magic. These homages demonstrate how the core elements of the Mitanni story, innovation, diplomacy, and a sudden, unexplained fall, have become powerful archetypes. They show that a civilization doesn't need to be a household name to fuel the imagination. Sometimes, the obscurity is the very thing that makes it so attractive, allowing for creative reinterpretation without the weight of overwhelming public expectation. This ongoing presence in books, games, and other media, however speculative, performs an invaluable service for history itself. It acts as a gateway, preserving the name and the basic premise of the kingdom in the broader cultural consciousness. A player who enjoys leading the Mitanni to victory in a strategy game might later watch a documentary about the Bronze Age collapse. A reader captivated by a historical novel might seek out non-fiction books to learn what really happened. In this way, popular culture becomes a vital link in the chain of memory, ensuring that the story of this vanished empire continues to find new audiences. It keeps the mystery alive, reminding us that history is not just a list of dates and facts, but an endless source of stories about ambition, power, and the fragile wonder of human achievement. But the most exciting frontier may lie not in the sky, but deep within the earth itself, in the realm of microscopic evidence. Advanced DNA analysis is beginning to revolutionize our understanding of ancient population movements, and the Mitanni present a perfect case study. By extracting and sequencing genetic material from skeletal remains found in Mitanni-associated tombs, scientists can finally answer the long-debated question of the ruling class's origins. Do the bones show a clear genetic signature from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, confirming the theory of an Indo-European warrior elite? Or does the evidence point to a more complex picture of cultural assimilation rather than mass migration? This genetic data can trace kinship lines within royal burials, revealing dynastic relationships and even potential causes of death from ancient pathogens. Furthermore, isotopic analysis of teeth enamel can tell us where an individual grew up, potentially identifying foreign-born queens or diplomats within the Mitanni court, providing tangible proof of those long-distance royal marriages mentioned in the Amarna letters. This biochemical evidence turns dusty bones into biographies, offering a clarity that clay tablets alone can never provide. This new wave of discovery is fundamentally driven by a collaborative spirit that breaks down the traditional walls between academic disciplines. The lone archaeologist with a trowel is now part of a much larger team. Climatologists pore over soil samples from ancient riverbeds, analyzing pollen spores to reconstruct the precise agricultural environment of the Haber Valley, and to find hard evidence for the droughts that may have crippled Mitanni's economy. Materials scientists use X-ray fluorescence spectrometers on site to instantly determine the elemental composition of a piece of glass or metal, tracing its origin to specific quarries or trade routes. Linguists and computer scientists are employing powerful AI algorithms to decipher the problematic Hurrian language, searching for patterns in the known vocabulary that could unlock the meaning of still undeciphered texts. This interdisciplinary approach transforms a historical question into a scientific one, allowing each field to contribute a piece of the puzzle, creating a holistic picture of Mitanni's rise and fall that is far more nuanced than any single perspective could provide. For the public, perhaps the most engaging advancements are in the digital realm, where technology is being used to resurrect Mitanni in vivid detail. Using a process called photogrammetry, archaeologists can now take hundreds of overlapping photographs of an excavation site or a fragile artifact and use software to stitch them into a precise, three-dimensional digital model. This allows a delicate fresco or a crumbled wall to be preserved forever and studied from every angle by experts around the world without risk of damage. More ambitiously, digital artists and modelers are collaborating with archaeologists to create full virtual reconstructions of Mitanni sites. Based on the floor plans unearthed at places like Tel Brak, they can reconstruct the towering walls of Washukani, the bustling activity of its workshops, and the vibrant interiors of its palaces, complete with the colorful murals that once adorned them. These are not mere fantasy. They are informed, scientific recreations that allow us to do the impossible, to walk through the streets of a vanished kingdom and visualize the world as a Mitanni citizen would have seen it, making this distant culture feel immediate and breathtakingly real. The path forward is not without its significant challenges. Many of the most promising sites likely to contain answers lie in regions of modern-day Syria and Iraq that have been profoundly affected by instability and conflict. Archaeological work in these areas is often paused indefinitely, and tragically, looting and the destruction of cultural heritage have erased untold clues forever. Furthermore, the very nature of the evidence is fragile. Ancient DNA degrades quickly in warm climates, and crucial organic materials like wood and textiles rarely survive. This makes every new, undisturbed discovery exponentially more precious, yet the resolve of the research community has never been stronger. There is a palpable sense that we are on the cusp of major breakthroughs, that the next turn of an archaeologist's trowel in the right tell could uncover the tablet that finally names Washukani, or the royal tomb that rewrites our entire understanding of the Mitanni dynasty. The mystery that has captivated scholars for over a century is now being pursued with a new set of tools and a renewed sense of possibility, bringing us closer than ever to hearing the true story of this lost empire, told not by its enemies but from its own rediscovered heart. The fall of a civilization that thrived over 3,000 years ago might seem like a distant concern, a footnote for specialists, but the story of Mitanni is far more than ancient history. It is a profound and urgent mirror reflecting some of the most pressing challenges of our own modern world. Its sudden erasure from the map speaks directly to our contemporary anxieties about cultural survival, environmental stability, and the fragile architecture of global order. When we look at Mitanni, we are not just looking back, we are looking at a cautionary tale written in clay and dust, one that holds startling relevance for our interconnected 21st century. Consider first the delicate art of cultural preservation. For centuries, Mitanni was a vibrant, sophisticated society with its own art, religion, and technological innovations. And then it was nearly wiped clean from human memory. Its rediscovery was a triumph of relentless archaeological detective work, a testament to our enduring need to reclaim lost chapters of our shared story. This struggle resonates powerfully today as heritage sites across the globe face threats from urban development, climate-related erosion, looting, and the tragic collateral damage of armed conflict. The race to find Washukani before it is lost forever parallels the modern efforts to protect ancient monuments from rising sea levels or to digitally archive artifacts from war-torn regions. Mitanni's story is a stark reminder that culture is not a permanent inheritance. It is a fragile vessel that can be shattered in a generation, and its protection requires constant, vigilant effort. It challenges us to ask what pieces of our own collective human story we are protecting for future generations, and what might be silently slipping away. Furthermore, the potential role of climate change in Mitanni's collapse offers a chillingly familiar narrative. Paleoclimatological evidence suggesting a prolonged regional drought forces us to confront the powerful intersection of environmental and human systems. A shifting climate did not merely create a backdrop for Mitanni's end. It likely acted as a threat multiplier, straining agricultural yields, sparking economic distress, and amplifying the social unrest that made the kingdom vulnerable to its external enemies. This ancient pattern echoes in our headlines today, where scientists draw clear lines between climate change, resource scarcity, and geopolitical instability. The competition for water, fertile land, and energy that we see playing out on the world stage is a modern version of the desperate struggles that may have consumed the Bronze Age. Mitanni's fate suggests that environmental stress is rarely the sole cause of a society's fall, but it is almost always a critical accelerant, pushing strained political and economic systems past their breaking point. It is a powerful argument for viewing environmental stewardship not as a separate issue, but as a fundamental pillar of national and global security. On a geopolitical level, Mitanni's position, a major power caught between the competing giants of Egypt, the Hittites, and a resurgent Assyria, feels remarkably contemporary. Their survival for 2 centuries was a masterclass in diplomatic balancing, a high-wire act of alliances, royal marriages, and shrewd negotiation. Yet, their ultimate collapse demonstrates the inherent fragility of an order built on such precarious balances. When the interests of their powerful allies shifted, or when a new, aggressive player like Superior's Hittites entered the game, the entire structure crumbled with breathtaking speed. This serves as a potent metaphor for our own multipolar world, where shifting alliances, economic interdependence, and the rise of new powers create a constant state of flux and uncertainty. Mitanni's history reminds us that geopolitical stability is often an illusion, a temporary calm maintained by a complex and easily disrupted web of relationships. It encourages a sense of humility about the permanence of any international order and underscores the critical importance of resilient and adaptable foreign policy. Finally, the most enduring lesson from Mitanni is one of deep interconnectedness. This was not an isolated kingdom. It was a nexus of trade, technology, and ideas. Their horse training manuals were studied by their Hittite enemies. Their artistic styles influenced Assyrian craftsmen. Their gods were adopted into foreign pantheons. Even in its dissolution, Mitanni's culture was not destroyed but diffused, absorbed into the DNA of the civilizations that followed. This is a powerful antidote to the idea of isolated national histories. It shows us that human progress has always been a collaborative, if often unconscious, project. Ideas, technologies, and artistic motifs have always flowed across borders, shaping and reshaping societies in a constant exchange. In our era of global supply chains, instant communication, and international scientific collaboration, Mitanni's story validates a worldview that sees humanity as a single, intertwined community. Their legacy, woven silently into the fabric of history, is a testament to the fact that no civilization ever truly disappears. It simply transforms, leaving its imprint on the world to come. By studying their rise and fall, we gain not just knowledge about the past, but a deeper, more nuanced perspective on the forces of innovation, resilience, and fragility that continue to shape our collective future. The disappearance of the Mitanni kingdom stands as one of history's most captivating and enduring puzzles, a powerful testament to the breathtaking complexity of ancient civilizations and the startlingly fragile nature of power itself. We have journeyed from its explosive rise as a revolutionary chariot-wielding empire to its almost whisper-quiet vanishment from the world stage, and this story does so much more than simply recount events from a distant past. It challenges us to look beyond the superficial narratives of kings and battles, urging us to consider the profound and interconnected myriad of factors diplomatic, environmental, technological, and human that truly shape the destiny of entire societies. This is not a story with a single villain or a simple explanation. It is an intricate tapestry where threads of climate shift, military innovation, political betrayal, and sheer ambition were all pulled tight at once until the entire magnificent weave unraveled. As modern archaeologists and historians continue to painstakingly uncover new clues from the earth and reinterpret ancient texts, we do more than just solve an academic mystery. We honor the legacy of this forgotten kingdom by giving voice to a people whose own story was nearly erased by their conquerors. Each fragment of a colorful fresco, each cuneiform tablet detailing a trade agreement or a horse's diet, and each new theory debated in scholarly journals is an act of reclamation, pulling Mitanni back from the brink of oblivion and restoring its rightful place in the grand narrative of human history. This ongoing quest, driven by a combination of cutting-edge science and old-fashioned curiosity, ensures that the Mitanni are remembered not for how they disappeared, but for how they lived, innovated, and thrived. Ultimately, the story of Mitanni holds up a mirror to our own world, reflecting timeless lessons about resilience, adaptability, and the deep interconnectedness of human societies. Their experience reminds us that no civilization, no matter how powerful or sophisticated, is immune to the converging pressures of a changing climate, geopolitical rivalry, and internal discord. Their legacy, woven into the cultures of their successors, shows that influence can outlast political power and that ideas are often the most enduring conquest of all. History, in this light, is far more than a record of what has been. It is a vital guide for understanding the challenges we face today and a source of profound insight into the enduring patterns of our shared human experience. If you have enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of a vanished empire and the mysteries of the ancient world, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our past.